Hello YouTube and welcome back to World of Warships, and for this video we are going to be looking at the USS South Carolina, the Tier 3 US battleship. This is the ship that basically inaugurates you into the US battleship line, and honestly I think she is quite a nice ship to play around with. In fact, this was the first battleship that I ever really got into in World of Warships, and I think despite a lot of the power creep that has taken place these days, she is still a very capable ship to work around with, personally speaking. Slipping in and taking a quick look at her armor profile here. Hold on a second while I actually get that open. Okay, there we go. She is actually reasonably armored for a lower tier battleship. She's got some nice thick armor belt. She does have very thin stern and bow plating, but this is kind of common of your lower tier battleships. But once you pull that away, she's got some thick armor panels on the inner citadel as well. So she doesn't really eat citadels from front or rear as often as you might think. She's actually pretty well armored, especially if you angle her appropriately. Overall, she's not bad. She has 31,700 hit points on the B hull with 19% torpedo damage reduction. She has 4 double 305mm rifles or 12-inch guns, which are respectable. They have a 15.7 kilometer maximum range. And with Expert Marksman, they turn around 180 degrees in 38.3 seconds. Her HE shells do 4,100 damage. Her AP shells do 8,100 damage. And the HE shells also have a 20% fire chance, and overall she has 217 meters of dispersion at maximum range. And for secondaries, she has a bunch of these 76.2mm or 3-inch guns, and they have a 3-kilometer range and 4% fire chance, but they're really nothing to talk about too much. And these also double as her anti-air batteries. And, well, they are kind of laughable, only producing a maximum of 14 DPS, so kind of not something you're relying on for AA much. For her maneuverability, she sees 18 knots at the most with the top engine module, 480 meter turning circle, and a 9.4 second rudder shift. So she does have a nice tight turn, though she is a little bit on the slow side, but her rudder for a battleship also kicks over reasonably quick, so not bad in that regard. Definitely good for trolling shells into her side armor. As far as concealment, she is seen at 13.4 kilometers from the surface, 6 kilometers from the air, and after firing her main battery in smoke, she is seen at 10.6 kilometers. Either way, she is a battleship, so concealment really is not her strongest suit in the world. Definitely not something you're going to be relying on too terribly. I do also want to step back for a moment and note that she has a 30-second main battery reload time, and her HE shells also have 50mm base penetration capacity, which at this tier basically makes her HE shells strong against just about anything, unless they strike, say, the side armor of a battleship or maybe the armor belt of a heavier cruiser. But overall, the only thing that she's really not penetrating at this stage is battleships, really. And again, those concealment values, you're really not relying on them too much overall. I do have to note that this is a fully upgraded South Carolina. She is substantially slower with the base engine mod, and I think her base range is only like, 14-ish kilometers, so definitely something to keep note of. She's not the longest range battleship still, but she's still pretty good. And of course, for upgrade modules, I would say main armaments mod 1, because her secondaries really aren't worth investing in too much, and honestly, how often do you get detonated in Battleship? As far as the upgrade slot 2, though, I would definitely say damage control systems, mainly because your rudder doesn't get knocked out that often, your propulsion doesn't get knocked out that often, but you do tend to get set on fire and even flooded depending on what you're facing rather frequently, so good choice there. As far as commander skills, I would definitely say Expert Loader. Again, this is kind of a standard level 1 skill, I would think, for a lot of battleships, just so that when you're switching shells, you can get that time down a little bit faster. And Expert Marksman, of course, to kick your main battery rotation down a good bit, make it a little bit more comfortable, especially if you're getting into closer quarters. As far as other skills, leveling up the commander, because I only have a 3-pointer on here so far, I would recommend most likely Adrenaline Rush, so that as you take damage you can get your reload a little bit faster. I would also opt for... I would not opt for basic firing training or advanced firing training at this tier, mainly because, one, all this would really do is affect your secondaries or your AA, and, well, neither are particularly reliable. So at this stage I would actually probably opt for Superintendent, just so you get that extra heal. Maybe Vigilance, so you can pick up torpedoes a little bit more frequently. But the other one that I would consider to be especially viable would be Basics of Survivability. Survivability Expert really doesn't do you a whole lot of good, because that's really only an extra 1,000 hit points worth of health at this stage, and that's not really doing too much for you. Again, AFT, not really effective here. It doesn't, honestly, at this point in time, it doesn't do anything for you. So I would say Fire Prevention is a very viable skill, and you can either go for Concealment Expert or Manual Fire Control for secondaries, but again, Manual Fire Control at this level is not especially efficient, and Concealment, you're a battleship. You're still going to be seen from space no matter what you do. You're not really going to get the jump on anybody. So, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that's 4 points that you actually have free floating after use of fire prevention skill. So you can kind of use that on maybe an extra level 3 and a level 1, or maybe even a couple of level 2 skills, depending on your particular tastes. But overall, definitely, you definitely have some options here. I would definitely say this is a ship that goes for a very viable tank build, as it were. So be that as it may. Definitely some considerations to be made here. But overall, she does have a good number of options you can work with to some extent. She's definitely not a secondary battery monster like the German battleships, and you're not relying too much on her AA again either. And, well, you only really have the one skill for concealment, so definitely looking more at a lot of the survivability or damage output mods or skills than anything else. Overall, performance-wise, I would definitely have to say that the South Carolina, especially given that the game has changed since her initial inception and everything, she has definitely been power crept to some extent, but again, this is Tier 3. At this point, power creep doesn't really matter quite as much as it does in, say, Tier 8, 9, or 10 battles, where the power creep can be very dramatic by comparison to anything else, but by comparison to other ships. At Tier 3, though, the South Carolina, well, again, as I've said, I think she does suffer just a little bit from power creep. She has not been power crept into oblivion. Now, I've heard a couple of people talk about the South Carolina recently, where I think the Mighty Jingles, actually, was the person who was talking about it. The Tier 3 Japanese battleship, the Kawachi, where he was saying that the only reason that anybody played the South Carolina or enjoyed the South Carolina in the early stages of the game was that it wasn't the Kawachi. And now that they have other options, even the South Carolina is really the greatest option. Personally, the way I see it, the South Carolina is a very viable option. She does not suffer as heavily as I think other people seem to think she does. Certainly not as much as Jingles seems to think she does. She does still have that nice, solid American battleship accuracy that's out there. So when you get good gun angles, you can actually get some nice hits. I mean, hell, in some cases, some of the battleships that are in game right now, even at Tier 3, I would not expect to have done anything really reasonable to that destroyer when I shot at it. But the South Carolina is very capable of doing so, and at close ranges, these guns are very nice and accurate, and they do hit with a reasonable amount of punch. On top of that, it was at these tiers that you also tended to rely a little bit more on your drive-by shooting styles than you really relied on your long-range artillery. So there's also that to be said. But again, at long range, she does not suffer because she, again, does have that nice US battleship artillery accuracy, and she is very capable of hitting targets at max range and doing very reasonable amounts of damage. In fact, as long as you aim properly on just about any target, you can generally get fair damage on just about anything you choose to draw a bead on. I mean, overall, there's really not an incredible amount to say about the South Carolina. Again, it is Tier 3. There's not really a whole lot that's really special at this tier. But, again, the South Carolina, I think she just kind of needs a little bit of love and attention because I don't think she gets as much credit as she would be due with a lot of the ships that have been introduced lately, especially after the British battleships, the French battleships, hell, even the German battleships. She has some good strengths, some good merits, and they are not quite as well seen as they could be. That's really about all I have to say about her. That being said, I have been going through the US battleship line again. I did opt to do the Research Bureau Regrind for research points and whatnot. So I am slowly working my way back up towards the Montana. Of course, this meant I had to go through the St. Louis, the South Carolina, Wyoming, New York, etc. and so forth. So as I work my way up the lines, you can definitely be sure, or let me rephrase this, seeing as I already have gotten back to the North Carolina at Tier 8, you can expect to see videos from me regarding the others in due time, but just not going to be putting them all out at once, of course. That's a little bit too time-consuming for the moment. And suddenly no doubts as to why the friendly Wix was marked as a TK, was there? But anyway, just working my way again through the US battleship line and just remembering some things that I had going through my mind recently was just going back through the game 4 years ago when I was starting to play World of Warships and how much I enjoyed some of these earlier ships in some regards. Hell, even going back and playing St. Louis to re-unlock the South Carolina was an interesting experience as well, because I have not played that ship. In fact, I haven't even played the South Carolina in a couple of years. And having the opportunity to go back and play it, to re-grind through it, it's reopened my imagination, I guess you could say, to some of what these ships were capable of. And I've just been enjoying it. Of course, I do try to shorten the grind as much as I can where I can, but overall, it's been interesting so far. And I'm not going to deny that I have had some rather interesting matches as well. In fact, it may even be viable to say that I've had more interesting matches during some of the regrind work that I've been doing than I have with any of the higher tier ships lately. Now, granted, I'm not going to say that I have not had some interesting high tier matches, don't get me wrong. But I do find that the interesting matches for the lower tiers are either maybe a little bit easier to come by. Granted, it could also be a result of my skill gap. I'm going into lower tiers against or playing with somebody or a bunch of players who've probably only been playing the game for a few days, if even only just a few hours. So it's easy to excel and get some interesting numbers from those matches. At the same time, you don't... I guess in that regard, I guess it is harder to get those interesting matches on the higher tiers, especially for co-ops, but even so, it's just... I've honestly been surprised by by some of the more interesting matches I've had at the lower tiers. And even more so to say that I've had some rather interesting carries at the lower tiers as well, where the only thing that really saved some of the matches that I've gotten into, some of the teams that I've played with, was the simple fact that my skill level allowed me to know what I was doing to either tank more damage than anybody else, or my accuracy of fire was more effective than anybody else's, and it's just led to some really interesting matches overall, even just as a result of my own skill gap between that and the other players that I've been matched with. So, anyway, I guess I can go ahead and actually cut this video short. There's really not a whole lot to discuss too much with the South Carolina in question, and I suppose I shall catch you all again next time. I wish you all happy hunting, stay safe, take care out there, folks, and you know what? I'll just shut up here and I'll let you enjoy a second match without any narrative. Just enjoy the show. Have a good one, folks. Happy hunting.
cruiser sunk.